When I was in 8th grade, my friends and I decided to have a sleepover at my friend Jack's house, but instead of staying inside, we thought it would be more fun to camp out in his backyard. Jack had a big yard with plenty of space, and his parents were fine with the idea as long as we stayed close to the house. We were excited about the adventure, not knowing that it would turn into a night we'd never forget. Jack, Mike, Tom, and I spent the afternoon setting up a large, old tent that Jack's family had used on camping trips. It was big enough to fit all 4 of us comfortably, with room for our sleeping bags, snacks, and flashlights. Once the tent was up, we gathered firewood and made a small fire pit a safe distance away from the tent. As the sun began to set, we roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories, each one trying to outscare the others. The yard was surrounded by thick woods, and as night fell, the darkness seemed to swallow everything beyond the flickering light of our campfire. We heard the usual sounds of the forest: crickets chirping, frogs croaking, and the occasional rustle of leaves. It was peaceful at first, but as the stories got scarier, the sounds of the night started to feel more sinister. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the fire began to die down, and we decided to call it a night. We crawled into the tent, zipped up the door, and settled into our sleeping bags. Jack's parents had left the back porch light on, casting a dim glow over the yard, but the inside of the tent was pitch black. We talked for a while, laughing and joking, until one by one we started to drift off to sleep. I'm not sure how long I had been asleep when I was jolted awake by a noise outside the tent. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the leaves and twigs. My heart started to race as I listened, hoping it was just one of the guys going to the bathroom. But when I looked around, I saw that everyone was still in their sleeping bags. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Yeah," Mike replied, his eyes wide with fear. "What do you think it is?" We all listened in silence, the footsteps growing closer. They stopped right outside the tent, and we heard a soft, scratching noise on the fabric. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear the others' breathing quicken. "Maybe it's a raccoon or something," Jack suggested, trying to sound courageous, but we all knew he was just as scared as the rest of us. "Should we check it out?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before anyone could answer, the scratching stopped and the footsteps moved away, disappearing into the woods. We let out a collective sigh of relief, but none of us could shake the feeling of dread. We decided to stay awake for a while, just in case whatever it was came back. Just as we were starting to relax, we heard the footsteps again, this time circling the tent. The noise was louder, more insistent, and the scratching returned, more aggressive than before. We huddled together in the center of the tent, our flashlights flickering on and off as we tried to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, and there was an eerie silence. We held our breath, straining to hear any sound. Then, out of nowhere, the tent started shaking violently, as if someone or something was trying to rip it apart. We screamed, our flashlights casting wild shadows on the walls of the tent. "Run!" Jack shouted, unzipping the tent door and bolting out into the yard. We followed, stumbling over our sleeping bags and each other in our haste to escape. Outside, the porch light illuminated the yard, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. That is, until I saw it. A group of about 5 people, all dressed in hooded garments, standing behind the tent. We ran to the back door of the house, pounding on it until Jack's parents let us in. We told them what had happened, our voices shaking with fear. They reassured us that no one lived around there, but agreed to check the yard with us. Armed with flashlights and a baseball bat, we ventured back into the yard. The tent was still standing, though it looked a bit worse for wear. We searched the area but found no tracks, no signs of any intruder. The woods were silent, almost too silent, as if holding their breath. Jack's parents suggested we spend the rest of the night inside, and we didn't argue. We gathered our things and moved into the living room, huddling together on the floor. Sleep was out of the question. Every noise made us jump, our imaginations running wild with possibilities. The next morning, we went back outside to inspect the tent in the daylight. To our surprise, we found deep scratch marks on the fabric, as if something sharp had tried to tear its way in. We also saw cigarette butts on the edge of the lawn near the tent. We never figured out who those people were or what they had in mind that night, but the experience left us shaken. Each of us convinced it had been something more than just a prank. The memory of that night haunted us for a long time, and we never attempted another backyard campout. The woods behind Jack's house remained a place of mystery and fear, a reminder of a sleepover that went terrifyingly wrong. When my best friend Natalie invited me to spend the weekend with her at her grandparents' house, I jumped at the chance. Her family traveled a lot, and this time, they invited me to go with them out of town. The idea of a quiet weekend in a small town seemed perfect. Natalie's grandparents lived in an old house outside of the city, a place she said was full of character and history. Little did I know, it was also full of something else. We arrived late Friday afternoon, welcomed by Natalie's grandmother and grandfather. They were kind and hospitable, instantly making me feel at home. After some lively conversation in the living room and a delicious dinner, it was time for bed. Natalie and I were to sleep in the guest room, which happened to be the same room her grandmother slept in. The room was small but cozy, with a large bed for us and a smaller bed for her grandmother. As we got ready for bed, Natalie confided in me. "This house always creeps me out a bit. Do you mind if I sleep with Grandma tonight?" Her request startled me. If Natalie, who had been here countless times, felt uneasy, what did that mean for me? But I shrugged it off and assured her it was fine. We turned off the lights and the room was bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the curtains. Natalie climbed into bed with her grandmother, and I settled into the large bed by myself. I lay there for a while, listening to the house settle, its old bones creaking and groaning. Eventually, I began to drift off. Suddenly, I felt a tug on my covers. They slipped off my neck to my mid-arm. Alarmed, I opened my eyes and glanced around. The room was still and quiet. I pulled the covers back up and tried to fall asleep again. Moments later, the covers were pulled down again, this time to my midsection. My heart pounded in my chest. I sat up, peering through the dim light. Natalie was sound asleep with her grandmother, the moonlight revealing their peaceful faces. Trembling, I lay back down and pulled the covers over myself once more, determined to ignore whatever was happening. Then the covers were yanked off completely. I froze in fear, unable to move or make a sound. My throat felt tight, and when I finally managed to call out, my voice came out as a raspy whisper. "Help me." No one stirred. The room remained silent. Panic set in. I knew I had to get out of the bed. Summoning every ounce of courage, I leapt off the bed and darted to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, sinking to the floor in a flood of tears and terror. I stayed there for what felt like an hour, too scared to move. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I knew I had to return to the bed. I unlocked the bathroom door and crept back to the room. The covers lay in a heap on the floor. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and somehow, despite my fear, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to an empty room. The sunlight streamed through the window, dispelling the shadows of the night before. I was the last one to wake. I quickly dressed and headed to the kitchen, following the sound of voices and laughter. Everyone was there, talking and eating breakfast. When I walked in, Natalie's grandfather looked up and asked, "Are you okay?" Confused, I replied, "Why?" He then said something that gave me goosebumps. "You were up all night calling for help. We were worried about you." My mind raced. If they heard me, why didn't they come to my aid? I felt a mix of shame and confusion. I don't remember," I stammered. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. The terror I felt was real, and their indifference puzzled me. For the rest of the weekend, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone sinister lingered in that house. Natalie seemed oblivious to my unease, and I didn't want to ruin her time with her grandparents by bringing up my fears. but the memory of that night stayed with me long after we left. A haunting reminder that some places hold secrets best left undisturbed. As I look back, I still question my sanity. Did I imagine the whole thing? Or was there truly someone or something malevolent in that room? I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. I won't be spending another night in that house again.